The certified letter felt heavier than its few ounces should allow. Clint Harlow stood at his mailbox. The late afternoon sun of October 15th, casting long, skeletal shadows from the whispering pines that lined his driveway. The green and white sticker, with its stark, official tracking number, was a familiar sight from his 30 years with the Department of Natural Resources. Certified mail meant something had gone from informal to serious. It was the paper equivalent of a state trooper's knock on the door. He slid his thumb under the flap, the sound of tearing paper unnaturally loud in the quiet air. Inside, a single sheet of heavy bond paper from the Silver Birch Woods Community Association was clipped to a set of grainy, black and white photographs. The photos were of his own property, the gentle slope of his land as it met the water, thick with native ferns, wild blueberry bushes, and the 3 beautiful white birch trees he and his late wife, Helen, had planted 2 decades ago. He began to read the letter, his eyes scanning the dense, corporate jargon. Formal notice of violation, CC&R, Grorate, Udersport 2. To the occupant of 214 Lakeside Drive. This letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, governing the Silver Birch Woods community aesthetic. An inspection conducted on October 12th has identified unapproved and unmaintained landscaping on the property line adjacent to the community common area designated as Lakeside Path. Specifically, the overgrowth of wild foliage and untamed trees constitutes a breach of CC&R Paragraph 8.4.2 maintenance of harmonious view corridors, which requires all lots, whether member-owned or adjacent, to maintain clear and unobstructed sightlines to natural amenities to preserve collective property values. Cure required. You are hereby directed to clear all unapproved vegetation from the designated 10-foot view corridor within 14 days of the date of this notice. Penalty: failure to cure the violation by October 29th will result in the imposition of a fine of $100, $100 per day, retroactive to the date of this notice, until the matter is resolved to the satisfaction of the Architectural Control Committee ACC. Sincerely, the Board of Directors, Silver Birch Woods Community Association, Janine Mulrin, President. Clint read it twice, then a third time. A slow, cold anger began to replace his confusion. He wasn't a member of Silver Birch Woods. His property, purchased in 1998, predated the subdivision by 5 years and was explicitly carved out of its charter. He had no obligation to their rules, their covenants, or their ludicrously named harmonious view corridors. The 10-foot strip of land they were talking about wasn't a view corridor. It was his land. It was the place Helen had loved most, where she'd sit on a small wooden bench and watch the loons return each spring. Those weren't untamed trees. They were Helen's birches. He looked from the letter to the shoreline, the leaves of the birch trees shimmering gold in the autumn light. This wasn't about a view. This was an invasion. And he had a sinking feeling he knew exactly who was leading the charge. Clint's life was a quiet composition of comforting routines. He was 62, retired, and lived in the small lakeside cabin he and Helen had designed and built with their own hands. It was a modest place of cedar and stone, filled with the scent of wood smoke and old books. His days were measured by the rising sun, the brewing of coffee, the walk to the dock to check the water temperature, and the patient work of maintaining the 2 acres of land that had been his sanctuary since Helen passed 5 years ago. Every corner of the property was a testament to her, the stone path to the water, where she'd insisted on placing each flat rock herself, the bird feeders, which he still filled with the specific seed mix she'd sworn by, and the shoreline, that vibrant, living buffer between his lawn and the lake. She had been a botanist, and to her, a manicured lawn meeting a shoreline was a crime against nature. The lake needs its skin. Clint, she'd say, pointing to the ferns and reeds. It's what keeps it healthy. So he kept it healthy, for the lake, and for her. On his study wall hung a large, framed survey map of his property, from when they first bought it. The lines were crisp, the surveyor's seal embossed in the corner. It was more of a sentimental piece than a practical one, a memento from the beginning of their life here. He often glanced at it, remembering the excitement of seeing their names on the deed, of owning a piece of the world that was entirely theirs. The property was an irregular rectangle, with the longest side bordering the pristine waters of Heron Lake. On the east side, it abutted a thin, undeveloped strip of land that was now the Lakeside Path common area for the newish subdivision next door. Silver Birch Woods was everything his property was not. It was a sprawling development of identical two-story homes with vinyl siding in shades of beige, taupe, and greige. Their lawns were chemically green, their mailboxes shaped like lighthouses, and their rules were legion. For years, the HOA had been a mild, distant annoyance. The previous owner of the house nearest the common path, a grumpy old fellow named Henderson, used to complain constantly about the HOA's nitpicking. They sent me a notice because my garden hose wasn't coiled in a perfect circle. He'd grumbled to Clint over the fence one day. A perfect circle. But 6 months ago, Henderson had moved to Florida, and a new owner had moved in, Janine Mulren. Clint had only met her once, a few weeks after she arrived. He'd been trimming a branch near the property line when she'd walked down the path, her athletic wear immaculate, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. "Good morning," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm Janine Mulren, your new neighbor, and the new president of the Silver Birch Woods HOA. "Clint Harlow," he'd replied, offering a simple nod. Her eyes had scanned his shoreline, her gaze lingering on the dense, natural foliage. "You know," she'd said, her voice a carefully calibrated blend of friendliness and condescension. "The community has been talking about cleaning up this little stretch. It's a bit wild. It really obstructs the view of the lake from our beautiful new meditation benches." "This is my property," Clint had said plainly. "My wife and I planted most of it. We like it wild." A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed her face before being replaced by the same polished smile. "Of course. Well, it was lovely to meet you. I'm sure we'll be in touch about finding a more collaborative approach to community aesthetics." He hadn't thought much of it then. It was just another HOA busybody. He underestimated her. He'd underestimated the power of a person who could weaponize corporate jargon like collaborative approach and community aesthetics. 2 weeks after that brief encounter, the first informal email had arrived. Clint never knew how she got his address. It was polite, a gentle reminder about maintaining property lines for the enjoyment of all. He'd replied with a single, clear sentence stating that he was not a member of the HOA and that the land in question was private property. He'd thought that would be the end of it. Now, holding the certified letter, he understood it had only been the beginning. A week later, a text message buzzed on Clint's phone. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Maria Sanchez from the HOA board, 218 Silver Birch Drive. I think you should see this. It's from the October 1st meeting. Before they sent you that letter." Below the text was a link to an audio file. Clint sat at his kitchen table, the framed survey on the wall behind him, and pressed play. The audio quality was poor, clearly recorded on a phone in someone's lap. But Janine Mulren's voice was unmistakable clear, confident, and dangerously smooth. And that brings me to our main agenda item, the Lakeside Serenity Initiative," she announced over the murmur of the crowd. "For too long, the beautiful common area along the lake has been underutilized. I envision a tranquil space for our residents, a professionally designed meditation garden, a safe and accessible kayak launch, and clear, panoramic views of the water. It's about enhancing our lifestyle and, of course, our property values." There was a smattering of applause. "Now," Janine continued, her tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious, "there is one small impediment. The view from the path is currently blocked by a rather unsightly, overgrown thicket on the adjacent, non-member property. It's a mess of weeds and scraggly trees that completely undermines the harmony of the landscape." Clint felt his knuckles go white as he gripped his coffee mug. Scraggly trees. She was talking about Helen's birches. "Our bylaws, specifically Section 8.4.2, give us the authority to enforce aesthetic standards on properties that impact our common areas," she said, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "Therefore, as part of the initiative, the board has authorized me to begin the formal process of compelling the owner to clear this visual obstruction. We will start with a courtesy notice, and then escalate through the established enforcement protocols if necessary. This is not about being punitive, it's about protecting our collective investment. Any questions?" The recording ended. Clint sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. It was all there. Premeditated. She had announced her plan to the entire community, framing his cherished memorial as an unsightly thicket and misrepresenting her authority to bully him into compliance. He saved the audio file, renaming it Evidence A. The DNR officer in him, the part that lived by rules, documentation, and the letter of the law, was beginning to wake up. He pulled a copy of the silver birch wood CC&Rs from the folder where he kept all his property documents. A former neighbor had given it to him years ago. He found the section Janine had cited. 8.4.2 Maintenance of harmonious view corridors. To preserve the aesthetic and monetary value of the community, no structure, fence, hedge, or landscaping feature shall be erected, placed, or permitted to remain on any lot which may unreasonably obstruct the view from any other lot or from a common area. He and his daughter, Sarah, had laughed at the language when they first read it years ago. Harmonious view corridors, Dad. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi dystopia. She joked. The joke didn't seem so funny now. The language was vague, subjective, and in the hands of someone like Janine Mulrin. It was a cudgel. But Clint knew the key word was lot. His land was not a lot within Silver Birch Woods. It was a legal distinction Janine was conveniently ignoring. This fight wasn't going to be about gardening. It was going to be about definitions. And for that, he knew he would need more than just his deed. The Architectural Control Committee hearing was scheduled for October 30th, the day after the cure period expired. It was held in the Silver Birch Woods clubhouse, a sterile, beige room that smelled faintly of air freshener and quiet desperation. Clint arrived 10 minutes early, carrying a leather satchel containing his property deed, the framed survey from his wall, and a printout of the email exchange. Janine Mulrin sat at the center of a long folding table, flanked by two other board members who looked profoundly bored. She was the picture of authority, dressed in a sharp blazer, a gavel resting beside her perfectly organized papers. She presided over the meeting not as a community volunteer, but as a CEO chairing a hostile takeover. "Mr. Harlow," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the sparsely populated room. "Thank you for coming. As per our procedures, you have 3 minutes to address the committee regarding the violation at 214 Lakeside Drive. Your time starts now." A small digital timer on the table began to count down from 3:00. Clint stood and placed his deed on the table. Good evening. My name is Clint Harlow. First, I'd like to establish for the record that I am not a member of this association, and my property is not subject to your CC&Rs. Janine held up a hand. Mr. Harlow, that is a legal interpretation, and this is an aesthetic committee. Please confine your remarks to the violation itself. The violation is predicated on your jurisdiction, which you don't have, Clint countered, his voice calm and steady. However, even if we entertain your premise, the document you cite, Farber 8.4.2, refers to lots within Silver Birch Woods. My property is not a lot. He pushed the survey map across the table. This is the official survey of my land, recorded with the county in 1998. As you can see, my property line is clearly marked. The trees and foliage you photographed are well within my boundary. There is no designated view corridor or easement on my land. One of the other board members leaned forward to look at the map, a flicker of interest on his face, but Janine waved a dismissive hand. Sir, with all due respect, your personal documents are irrelevant to community aesthetic standards, she said, the condescension in her voice as sharp as broken glass. The simple fact is, the overgrowth is an eyesore that negatively impacts the use and enjoyment of the common area for our dues-paying members. The committee is concerned with visual harmony, not property lines. The timer beeped. Your 3 minutes are up, Mr. Harlow. This is a sham, Clint said, his voice low. Your comments are noted, Janine replied coolly. She picked up her gavel. The committee will take your presentation under advisement. We will mail you our finding within 5 business days. Next on the agenda, the Henderson Properties non-compliant mailbox lighthouse bulb wattage. Clint packed his satchel, the cold fury solidifying into a grim resolve. This wasn't a hearing. It was a formality. A box she had to check on her way to getting what she wanted. He walked out of the clubhouse and into the crisp autumn night, the trap snapping shut behind him. 5 days later, another letter arrived. This one not certified. It was a finding of violation and imposition of fines, informing him that the ACC had found his arguments unpersuasive and that the $100 daily fine was now officially in effect. Retroactive to October 15th. The bill was already $2,100. The daily accumulation of fines felt like a low-grade fever, a constant, draining pressure, every morning. Clint would wake up and do the math. $2,500, $2,600, $2,700. It was an absurd, imaginary number, but one that he knew Janine intended to make very real. He called Sarah. Dad, this is classic HOA overreach, she said after he explained the situation. Her voice was a comfort, a calm island of logic in his sea of frustration. They're counting on you being too intimidated or exhausted to fight back. They know that suing them is expensive, and they have a war chest funded by homeowner dues. It's a war of attrition. So what do I do? Document everything, she said, her paralegal mind kicking into gear. Every letter, every email, every receipt. Keep a log of any interactions. Don't talk to them in person without a witness. And you need to find a bigger hammer. A bigger hammer. The deed and survey are good, but they see them as your documents. You need something they can't dismiss, something from the county, the original plat map for their entire subdivision. If you can prove definitively that no easement was ever granted or recorded, their entire case evaporates. It moves from an argument about rules to an undeniable statement of fact. The conversation gave him a renewed sense of purpose. His next call was to Dave Jensen, a friend of 30 years who had been the lead surveyor for the county before retiring. A plat map fight, with an HOA. Dave's voice crackled with delight over the phone. Oh, Clint, you've come to the right place. This is my version of a crossword puzzle. I love digging through dusty archives to prove bullies wrong. Send me the parcel numbers for your place and the whole Silver Birch subdivision. I'll see what treasures I can unearth. Clint also knew he needed an ally on the inside. He sent a cautious text to Maria Sanchez, the board member who had sent him the audio recording. Thank you for the file. The hearing went as expected. I'm fighting this. Any information you can provide would be a great help. They met a few days later in the parking lot of a grocery store 2 towns over. Maria was visibly nervous, glancing around as she handed him a thick manila envelope. I shouldn't be doing this. Clint, she whispered. Janine. She's vindictive. She runs the board like it's her personal kingdom. But what she's doing to you is wrong. It feels personal. Why do you say that? Clint asked. I don't know. It's the way she talks about your property. It's not just about a view. There's a venom to it. She shook her head. Look, I have to go. This envelope has board meeting minutes from the last 10 years. Maybe there's something in there that can help. Just be careful. That evening, Clint spread the minutes out on his table. It was page after page of tedious discussions about holiday decorations and speed bumps. But as he got to the minutes from 2011, he found something interesting. Several pages were heavily redacted, with thick black lines obscuring entire paragraphs. The only legible words were references to dispute, adjacent property, and unauthorized clearing. It was about his property line. He was sure of it. Maria was right. There was a history here, and someone didn't want him to see it. The phone rang 2 weeks into November. It was Dave. Bingo, he said, his voice triumphant. Clint. I've got it all. The motherlode. An hour later, Dave was at Clint's kitchen table, unrolling a series of large, crisp documents. The first was a certified sealed copy of the original 1998 plat map for the development that would become Silver Birch Woods. Look here, Dave said, tracing a line with his finger. This is your property. This is their common area. And right here, in the space between them, is nothing. No dotted line for an easement, no notation for a view corridor, no setback requirement. Legally, it's a hard boundary. Her entire case is built on a fantasy. But that wasn't the smoking gun. Dave unrolled a second, older document. It was a copy of the developer's original planning proposal from 1997. This is what I found in the deep archives, Dave said, a grin spreading across his face. It's the developer's mission statement for the project. Listen to this. He cleared his throat and read aloud from a highlighted section. Special consideration will be given to the preservation of the existing riparian ecosystem along Heron Lake. The property at 214 Lakeside Drive, which will border the development, contains a significant natural shoreline. Our plan designates the adjacent common area as a passive use path, intentionally leaving the neighboring private property untouched to serve as a vital, private riparian buffer, ensuring the long-term health of the lake's ecosystem. Clint stared at the document, the words hanging in the air. It wasn't just that Janine was wrong. She was actively trying to destroy the very thing the original planners had sought to protect. This document completely inverted her argument. Preserving his overgrowth was the original intent. Her beautification was the violation of that spirit. Dave, this is incredible, Clint said, a feeling of profound relief washing over him. It gets better, Dave said, his eyes twinkling. He pointed back to the redacted minutes from 2011 that Clint had shown him. You were right to be suspicious. I pulled the county records for any code violations or complaints associated with your parcel number or Henderson's around that time. He slid a final piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of a DNR citation. In August 2011, Dave explained, a man was issued a stop work order and a $2,000 fine for attempting to illegally clear this exact same strip of land. He'd hired a crew and was tearing out the native plants to improve his view from the house that now belongs to Janine Mulrin. Clint looked down at the name of the man who had been fined. His blood ran cold. The citation had been issued to Mr. Frank Mulrin, Janine's late husband, and the signature at the bottom. The name of the DNR enforcement officer who had written the ticket and shut the operation down was his own. Clint sank into his chair. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't about a view corridor. It wasn't about property values. It was a decade-old grudge. It was a vendetta. Janine wasn't just attacking a piece of land. She was attacking the man who had, in her eyes, humiliated her husband. Suddenly, a scene flashed in Clint's mind. A brief, humanizing moment he'd witnessed weeks ago. He'd been walking his property line at dusk and had seen a light on in Janine's home office. She was standing by the window, holding a framed photograph. Her shoulders slumped. He hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but now he knew. She must have been talking to Frank's picture, promising to finish what he started, to right a wrong that only existed in her own mind. Her pain was recognizable, but what she was doing with it was monstrous. Janine must have sensed that Clint was gathering his forces, because her attacks became more direct, more desperate. One morning, he was awoken by the sound of chainsaws. An unmarked landscaping truck was parked on the common path, and two men were aggressively clearing brush right up to his property line. They weren't on his land, but they were being deliberately careless, sending debris flying into his yard and cutting so close that the roots of one of Helen's birches were exposed and severed. It was vandalism disguised as maintenance, a clear act of intimidation. Clint called the sheriff's department. A deputy came, listened patiently, looked at the property stakes, and sighed. "Sir, as long as they stay on their side of the line. It's a civil matter. There's not much I can do." It was another reminder the HOA was not the police, but law enforcement wouldn't save him from their procedural war. Then, the final blow. Another certified letter arrived. This one was from a law firm, filled with even more dense legalese than the first. It was a notice of intent to file a lien. The unpaid fines, now totaling over $4,000, were being formally recorded against his property. A lien was a cloud on his title, a legal anchor that could prevent him from ever selling or refinancing his home. If unpaid, the HOA could theoretically foreclose on it. The threat was no longer abstract. It was financial, permanent, and aimed at the heart of his life, his home. He felt a wave of despair, the weight of the fight pressing down on him. For a moment, he considered giving in, clearing the land, paying the fine. Was it worth the stress, the sleepless nights, the mounting legal costs he knew were coming? He walked down to the shoreline and stood before the 3 birch trees. He ran his hand over the papery bark of the one whose roots had been damaged. He looked at the empty wooden bench where Helen used to sit, and he thought of her voice. "The lake needs its skin." Clint. This was more than just his fight. It was hers, too. His resolve hardened. He would not let Janine Mulrin's decade-old bitterness desecrate this memory. He would see this through to the end. He called Sarah, booked the best property lawyer you know, and get me a 5-minute speaking slot at the HOA's annual meeting next month. It's time to go public. The night before the annual meeting, there was a quiet knock on Clint's door. It was Maria Sanchez. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with fear. "Clint, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "She knows. Janine knows I've been helping you. How? I don't know. Someone must have seen us. She cornered me after the board prep meeting tonight. She's blackmailing me. Clint ushered her inside. Blackmailing you with what? Maria wrung her hands. It's so stupid. My garden shed. It's painted forest green, but the approved color is evergreen. It's a slightly different shade. It's been that way for 5 years. Nobody has ever cared. But Janine has pictures. She said if I say one word against her at the meeting tomorrow, she'll push through the maximum fine $5,000 and put a lien on our house. My husband just got laid off. Clint, we can't afford that. We'd be ruined over a can of paint. The cruelty of it took Clint's breath away. He was facing a moral dilemma. If he exposed Janine to save himself, he would be sacrificing Maria, his only ally. Janine had insulated herself, turning her petty tyranny into a weapon that forced good people into silence. Clint looked at Maria's terrified face, and then at the stack of documents on his table, the plat map, the developer's intent, the DNR citation. His victory could not come at her expense. A win that destroyed someone else wasn't a win at all. Maria, he said, his voice firm, go to the meeting tomorrow. Say nothing. Vote however you need to vote to protect your family. Let me handle it. But how she has you trapped? A new plan began to form in his mind, one that went beyond simply defending his own property. It was a way to protect Maria, to defang Janine, and to reframe the entire conflict. She thinks the fight is about my trees. Clint said, she's wrong. It's about the abuse of power, and I'm going to end it. The community clubhouse was packed. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glare on the faces of the 50 or so homeowners of Silver Birch Woods. At the front of the room, the 5 board members sat at a long table, Janine Mulren at its center. A large projector screen behind them displayed the meeting agenda. To its right, a small digital clock was set for 5-minute intervals, the time limit for the open forum. Clint sat in the second row, his leather satchel resting at his feet. He felt a calm clarity, the kind he used to feel before a complex field operation. We now move to the open forum, Janine announced, her voice resonating with false warmth. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. First on the list is Clint Harlow. She said his name with a hint of amusement, as if he were a curious novelty. Mr. Harlow, I'll remind you that this forum is for members to discuss community business. As a non-member, your standing is questionable, but in the spirit of neighborhood harmony, we will grant you the floor. Clint walked to the podium and placed his files on the lectern. The timer on the screen began to tick down. 50, 4, 59, 4, 58. Good evening, he began, his voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the silent room. My name is Clint Harlow. Many of you know me only as the owner of the unsightly thicket next door. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. For the past 6 weeks, your president, Miss Mulren, has been engaged in a campaign of escalating harassment against me, culminating in a $4,500 fine and an intent to file a lien against my home. I am here tonight to present the facts. He placed the first document on the overhead projector. It was the formal violation notice, with the grainy photos of his trees. This is the violation. Citing CC&R Section 8.4.2, which prohibits obstructing harmonious view corridors. This entire case rests on the HOA's claim to an easement over my land. He swapped the notice for his next document. The image that flashed on the screen was crisp and official, the sealed 1998 county plat map. He used a laser pointer to trace the lines. This is the official plat map for Silver Birch Woods, recorded with the county before a single house was built. Here is my property. Here is your common area. There is no view corridor. There is no easement. There is no legal basis for the HOA's claim. It has never existed. The room was filled with the sound of murmuring. Homeowners leaned forward, whispering to their neighbors. Janine's smile had vanished. Mr. Harlow, this is a matter for the ACC, which has already rendered its decision. I'm not finished, Clint said, his voice cutting through her interruption. The timer read 3:15. He put the third document on the projector, the developer's original intent. Furthermore, the original developer's plan, the very document that created this community, states the exact opposite of Ms. Mulron's position. He read the key sentence aloud, leaving the neighboring private property untouched to serve as a vital, private riparian buffer. Your president isn't just violating my property rights, Clint said, letting the words sink in. She's actively working against the founding principles of your own community. The murmuring grew louder. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Janine's face was a stony mask. The timer read 2:00. This raises a question. Clint continued, his voice dropping slightly. Why pursue a baseless claim with such personal intensity? I believe the answer lies in these. He projected the redacted board minutes from 2011. These minutes detail a past dispute over this exact piece of land. As you can see, the name of the homeowner who initiated the dispute has been blacked out. He paused, letting the suspense build. You might wonder who it was that tried to illegally clear that same land 11 years ago. At that moment, as if on cue, Maria Sanchez stood up from her seat in the front row. Her face was determined. It's time for the truth, she said, her voice shaking but clear. She walked to the podium and handed Clint a single sheet of paper. Janine's eyes widened in betrayal and rage. Maria, sit down. You are out of order. But it was too late. Clint placed the unredacted page on the projector. The blacked-out name was now visible, Frank Mulron. A collective gasp went through the room. And now for the final piece of the puzzle, Clint said, his voice filled with a quiet sadness. The timer showed 0:45. He projected the DNR citation from 2011. This is the stop work order and fine issued to Mr. Mulron for that illegal clearing. And the DNR officer who had the unfortunate duty of issuing it was me. The room fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Janine's vendetta was laid bare for all to see. It was not about community. It was about a personal, undisclosed conflict of interest stretching back more than a decade. She had used their money and their power to settle a personal score. The timer read 0:10. Clint looked directly at the homeowners. This was never about a view. It was about weaponizing this association's rules to punish a perceived enemy. And that brings me to my final point. He looked at Maria, then back at the crowd. This kind of power is too easily abused. No resident should have to live in fear of financial ruin over the color of a shed. The timer beeped, its sound final and damning. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Every eye in the room was on Janine Mulron. Her face was ashen, her composure shattered. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was Maria who broke the spell. She stood again, but this time she walked to the board table and addressed the vice president. I move, she said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence, to immediately and permanently void all violations, fines, and legal actions against Mr. Harlow. I further move that the association issue a formal, written apology, and I move to censure President Mulron for a profound and undisclosed conflict of interest, and refer this matter to an immediate vote of no confidence for removal from the board. Second, a voice called out from the back of the room. The HOA's attorney, a man who had been sitting quietly in the corner, leaned over and whispered urgently to the stunned vice president. He nodded grimly, understanding the legal cataclysm that had just unfolded. Continuing to support Janine would expose the entire association to a massive lawsuit. All in favor of the motion, the vice president asked, his voice weak. A sea of hands shot up. It was nearly unanimous. All opposed. Only one hand remained down Janine's. The motion passed. Without a word, Janine Mulrin slowly gathered her papers, her movements stiff and robotic. She did not look at Clint. She did not look at the board. She walked out of the clubhouse and into the darkness, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving a community to reckon with the pieces. In the weeks that followed, the transformation was swift. The lien was officially withdrawn. The fines were erased from the record. A formal letter of apology, signed by the 4 remaining board members, arrived in Clint's mailbox. At a special meeting convened a week after the climax, Janine Mulrin was formally removed from the board by an overwhelming vote. The following spring, Clint stood on the common path, not with an adversary, but with Maria Sanchez, the new board president. The air was filled with the smell of fresh soil and mulch. Instead of building a spite fence, Clint had offered a different solution. He worked with the new board, using the funds originally allocated for Janine's Lakeside Serenity initiative, to purchase and plant hundreds of native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers along the actual common area. They were restoring the developer's original vision, creating a living, breathing border that benefited the community and the lake. Homeowner volunteers worked alongside him, their shared labor a quiet act of healing. As they watched a young family plant a serviceberry bush, Maria turned to him. "You know, Clint, this whole mess exposed a lot of problems with how things were run. We were so focused on punitive rules. We forgot about community. We're forming a new committee, an independent oversight group, a community fairness and transparency committee. Its job will be to review our bylaws for clarity, mediate disputes before they escalate, and ensure the board acts in good faith." She paused, looking at him directly. "We need someone to run it. Someone who understands the rules, but also understands what's right. Someone who has proven they're willing to fight for it." Clint looked out at the lake, at the 3 white birch trees standing tall and proud on his shoreline. He thought of Helen, of the sanctuary they had built, and of the fight to protect it. He had won his battle, but now he had the chance to ensure no one else would have to fight one like it again. He could retreat back into his quiet life, or he could step forward and help build something better. The choice was clear. He turned back to Maria, a small smile touching his lips. "I accept."